DashBored. This was a game sent to me by the master of interesting Steam things, Sly Boots. He sent this to me because this is his favorite RPG Maker game, and he being an avid fan of the show and quite familiar with the show's history, he knows I've spent a lot of time with this program developing my own games. Like, literally half my life at this point, and if a natural disaster hadn't destroyed all of that, I wouldn't be here doing this. To moderately, slightly more success. Wow, I just made myself super depressed. But, you know, I appreciate his line of thinking here, you know. This is my favorite thing with this program. I kind of want your input and your expertise on it. What do you think? Unfortunately, I feel like that might be a problem as well, because I'll admit flat out, having spent as much time with these development tools as I have certainly developed a lot of biases against RPG Maker games. Like, a big one for me, just throwing this out there, is, and I see this all the time on my Steam list by a bunch of games I got, like, for free through Humble and stuff. If your RPG Maker game uses nothing but the default characters and tile sets, I don't want to play that game. Like, you know, it looks completely unremarkable, and I'm gonna get it confused with 1,000,001 other games. Those things are mostly there for placeholders until you can either replace them with your own assets or, you know, purchase, like, the license from libraries and stuff. And I'm not above admitting I'm a hypocrite in this regard. I mean, my channel art is basically a doctored screenshot from the RPG Maker game I made. But that was also the last surviving remnant of my life's work that led to this channel's creation. And to be fair, I'm not much of an artist on my own, and I can't exactly afford to hire an artist right now. So if you think you can make better channel art for me on your own dime, bring it on. You know, I'm not saying I'm not a hypocrite in this regard, but just don't use the default stuff, please, or at least minimize that. Fortunately, DashBoard does not do that, which is good because that's like the biggest cardinal sin for me. So we're already off to a right proper start with this game, and the fact is, having sat down and played it for about 12 hours, I've got like a playthrough and a half under my belt at this point, I can tell you, I really enjoyed this game. I wouldn't say it's like my #1 favorite game made on RPG Maker or anything, but it's easily in the solid top 5. Now the story follows Nicholas, and if you are to believe his class, he is a loser. He essentially gets transported to this mysterious, dark, and foreboding world of the Garden, under the watchful eye of some sort of destructive demon god thing known as Varus. His goal? Quite simple. Get the hell out of there and go home, as he will tell you at the end of every single battle. Fortunately, he's got some friends in this regard. You've got Isaac, the CRT robot who's also a Mafia Don. Points for that. That's a creative idea. I like that. I'm already on board with these characters. You have Midori, your walking save station who kicks an awful lot of ass and actually uses save slots as an attack. Okay, yeah, this game is creative as all hell. Are you getting that yet? You have Jack, your local weapons dealer, who will not give you a discount even if he's in your party, and will charge you to use him. And of course, Alex. This guy who definitely doesn't know half as much as he wants you to think he does. Seriously, forget this guy. You also have 3 more bonus secret characters, one of which I believe was added in a later update to the game. And I'm not going to go immediately into these characters, but go seek out the optional characters. One of them is completely broken, and I love her. The optional characters and the rest of the cast of 8 playable characters is awesome, if you are to believe this game's in-game quiz, where saying that is the correct answer. However, upon saying this out loud, I realized something that this game forgot. There's actually 9. You could just say that they forgot to update this when they added the extra character with the bonus dungeon, but I choose to think that they accidentally overlooked the most OP member of your team of all. Fish. Hashtag justice for Fish. People need to remember this guy. He's awesome. Also, you get to learn what fishes sound like when they level up. Come on, I must have sold a couple of copies just saying that. This game is awesome like that. It should also be noted that this game has really deep, interesting, interpersonal relationships with characters that are deeply explored, especially in the ending I got, that kind of puts that to the forefront while putting everything at the sort of back burner. And I think the characters are very well developed and just genuinely interesting. It has a very interesting world with deep, interconnected politics. It's not just a weird, quirky story with some fun, interesting setting and some goofy storytelling. It's cosmic horror, and it's, in some sense, body horror. It's got sort of a deep and interesting sort of creepiness about us as people and the nature of humanity in some cases. This game asks quite a lot of questions, even if it's not necessarily sure if it should be asking or how to ask them. It does feel a little bit shaky in some of its storytelling attempts, but this game, I think it nails creepiness perfectly for me. Like, I don't do horror terribly well. That's why Deadly Premonition is one of my favorite horror games, because it's not, like, super scary, but when it's not being scary, it's unbelievably unsettling, because you're in this world where you can't trust anyone around you, and everything is just off kilter, and you have to sort of readjust everything, and it slowly layers on you more and more until you kind of crack under the pressure, and even after the game's off, it makes you continue to ask questions. That's how I felt about this game, and I think that's successful horror at its core, at least for me. And I've only ever seen one or two other games do this. There was this indie Game Boy game I played a while back that I've been meaning to review that did it too, and mental note, review that sometime. But you know, this game, I think if you like horror like I do, in the sense that you don't like necessarily being scared, but you like sort of a kind of growing, unsettling feeling that sticks with you afterwards, it makes you think about yourself and the world around you, this game's got shades of that, and I think it does it pretty well. Overall, DashBored is basically a fountain of creative ideas and really cool ideas. The writing is excellent, and you get a multitude of different playable characters and 4 different endings. Now, I don't have a lot of complaints about this game, but one of the endings certainly kind of bugged me a little bit, and it was the ending I got. Basically, the game has an A plot, that's Nicholas getting out of the garden and defeating Varys, and then you kind of have like a B plot that gets introduced at the end of like the 60% the way through the game mark. And at least the ending I got kind of completely threw the A plot out the window and forgot about it to focus on the backstory of the B plot. And while it's a very, very well written plot, and it's actually really quite heart-wrenching and interesting, it just seems like a weird idea to get rid of basically the core concept of your game's plot for the sake of this side story. And I would have suggested maybe trying to like work it into the proper ending, or at least give some closure to, like, you know, the reason why we were there and the dark god and like the whole driving force of the plot for like the first 60% of the story at least. It's a little weird like that. But on the bright side, this game, writing-wise, reminds me of something like Undertale, or of course the legendary Super Nintendo game that inspired that, A Wrathbound. You know, it's a more or less modern take on an RPG, and it's got goofy, fun humor with clever characters. It's a lot more adult than those two, with a lot more coarse language as well as grim themes, although Undertale can go there pretty hard. But overall, I think if you want an interestingly written story, this one's it. It's got brilliant characters, a really cool world, and really just a great and memorable experience. It's got some hiccups, it's not perfect, and I certainly would have appreciated more closure on, like, you know, the driving force of the plot in the ending I got, but you know, there's other endings I can go back and am going back to go explore that. The fact is, what I experienced in my 1.5 playthroughs of this game so far, really quite interesting and fun. But it also has like this dark, creepy, sort of cosmic horror overtone to the whole thing. So if you're into that, man, you gotta play this game for the story alone at least. Gameplay-wise, DashBored is pretty standard for an RPG. You walk around, you collect items in chests, you go into dungeons, you solve some light puzzles, you run into some randomized encounters and some sometimes not randomized encounters. You level up, you equip better stuff, you fight slightly stronger monsters, and you progress the story. DashBored is, mechanically speaking, if nothing else, a perfect exercise in execution of the fundamentals. It doesn't necessarily do anything particularly crazy or wild outside of a standard RPG, but it has the basics down and it does them well. It has some interesting puzzles, but otherwise it's a standard RPG experience. That said, the fundamentals are important. If you don't have those down, everything else will collapse around you. And seeing that this is a completely functional, well-made game, that inspires a lot of confidence with what this developer can do moving forward. However, while it does take a fairly basic approach to the standard tried and true method of RPGs, it does it well and with very little problems. Like, seriously, I'm trying to think of problems with this game, and honestly, mechanically speaking, I can remember 1 or 2 things that stood out to me. The hitboxes on some of this stuff is a little bit jank. I remember somehow talking to a character from the other side of the room. I remember defeating a boss and the camera was supposed to pan, but I moved before it panned and like the camera freaked out a little bit. That's kind of it though. Like, mechanically it's a very, very solid game, and while it doesn't do anything too different, it certainly does it well. This game does happen to take a bit of a 3-act structure, however, and the game is centered around these 3 different playable in-game days. However, and this is one of the few issues I have with this game, a lot of content is day locked, and you can miss out on a lot of stuff if you don't explore properly. There's a reason why I have a playthrough and a half as opposed to a full playthrough. I had been collecting items, and I had actually seen something that seemed suspicious that I might be able to use those items for, but I couldn't figure it out. So I figured I'd come back later and I'd solve this mystery, or something would have changed and I would be able to interact with something then. And it turned out that I just missed the entire secret bonus stuff for that, which is really quite a shame. If you want to experience this game in full, you're gonna have to be a very, very thorough explorer. And while the in-game world isn't huge, there's like half a dozen locations that change depending on the day, it does pay to explore them as thoroughly as possible. And I'm saying this especially because I want to emphasize how much secret bonus stuff this game has. This game has an incredible amount of extra content in it. Like, seriously, when I started my second playthrough, I started looking for things, and I asked the person who sent this to me for some tips on, like, what I was supposed to do with this thing that I couldn't figure out. And that led down a giant rabbit hole of finding bonus characters and exploring bonus dungeons and finding crazy secret bosses and weapons and stuff. Seriously, the depth of this game is quite staggering for a game that only has about half a dozen map-based locations. This game is very, very content-rich, I want to stress that, and it pays to explore everything and talk to everyone and take every challenge that's provided to you, because if you don't, you might miss some stuff and you might end up regretting it, because seriously, some of that bonus stuff is just amazing. Go meet the Russians, I'm begging you. Like seriously, you will meet the most majestic character in the game. If nothing else, go do that dungeon. And then go do the pumpkin stuff, because seriously, that leads down to like one of the coolest things in game. And there's a quiz and a fight club and so much stuff you can do that's just optional. Go play this game, it's really, really good. DashBored is quite an impressive game. I honestly don't think there's too much about it I can complain about, and while it doesn't necessarily do anything really beyond the standard, it does it very, very well, and with minimal bugs and issues. It seems like a relatively well put together game, for sure. I mean, seriously, I'm trying to think of other complaints I have for my gameplay experience. At the end, I think I counted 2 typos, and that would be it. It's just a very, very well made RPG Maker game. Presentation-wise, DashBored is really quite nice. Like I said, they managed to avoid the biggest issue I have with RPG Maker games, in that it doesn't look like a blatant RPG Maker game, aside from like the title screen and the UI anyway. Overall, I just appreciate the fact that it's not using all the base tile sets. But all the characters are really well done, the locations look good and varied and interesting, everything's well animated, and there's not really anything I can complain about. They nailed the visuals of this game. It looks great. Audio-wise, I'm a bit more mixed. Like, don't get me wrong, the soundtrack and sound effects sound really, really good. I really appreciate the sort of dark electronica soundtrack they've got going on here, because it is genuinely just as creepy as like the sort of cosmic horror vibe this game is going for sells it. But one thing I noticed, and I noticed it like the moment the game started and at a few other key moments where I really just wanted to listen to the music, anytime that they've mixed in sound effects to the music, it's mixed really, really loudly. And audio mixing is definitely a problem. It's a hard thing to learn. I know whenever I make any video, I question whether or not I've got the background music way too loud or something, and I'm really quite sensitive to that myself. But I remember playing this game and listening to the songs, especially in the sort of post-metro area of the second day without spoiling too much. You hear like the sound of waves lapping up against the shore with this really nice music in the background, and I wanted to record the music and I wanted to listen to it without the waves. So I turned off like all the sound effects and stuff, and it was still there and it was still incredibly loud. Like they're for some reason just mixed in with the music. And unfortunately, this means that if you're really just into the music, it might distract from it. Now, fortunately, from what I can tell, the developers actually put the entire soundtrack up on Bandcamp, so you can find that relatively easily. But I just wish I could have listened to it a little bit less obstructed in the game, you know? Because the soundtrack really is dark and creepy, and it works so well, but it just feels like it's being overshadowed by kind of obnoxious sound effects that, while suiting for their environment, aren't really conducive to a good music listening experience when you're trying to get into the mood, you know? Overall, the presentation is good, but like everything else with this game, it's got one or two hiccups that could be ironed out with, you know, maybe a little bit more time in development and a little bit more experience from the developers. Overall, I think it's pretty great, but it does have issues, and it's important to go into it knowing that. Now, if you want a copy of DashBored on Steam, it is selling for $5.50. Really? That is, wow, that for this game, I would say that is an absolute steal. You're gonna get at least 8 hours of gameplay out of this, and that's through one playthrough. Like I said, I've got a playthrough and a half, and I'm at like 12 hours, and if I want to see all 4 endings, I'm gonna have to play through the game at least twice more, plus like do some special stuff for one other ending. And if you really want to dive in and play all the secret stuff and discover all the fun secrets, and get really lost in this creepy, dark world, and explore the plots and really intricate, interesting characters, you will be there for a while. I think $5.50 is an absolute bargain for this game, honestly. And I have to give a huge shout out and thank you to Sly Boots for hooking me up with a copy. He said this was his favorite RPG Maker game, and I totally see why. I can think of a couple more games made in RPG Maker I might rate as high or higher. Stuff like Yume Nikki or Ib. Wow, it's been a while since I played either of those, but this game has a very, very creepy, oppressive atmosphere. It's not jump out scary, but it's just unsettling and creepy. And honestly, I'm not a big fan of horror, but it's that lingering creepiness. It's the sort of very unsettlingness of us as people and what you don't know, like the deadly premonition level of creepy that really affects me and that I really resonate with, more so than the jump out and go ooga booga booga. I think this game nails creepiness and scariness properly, and it has a really fun, interesting story. It has very interesting characters, and while it's not perfect, I can see some blemishes here and there in the story with the kind of weirdly paced alternate endings, as well as a couple of bits of jank in the gameplay and the unfortunate amount of content you could potentially lose out on. I think this game is really quite good, and if you like RPG Maker games, if you like creepy games, if you like things that have an interesting story or a fun message to tell, or just something a little different, I think DashBored is something to look into, because this game, I think, is pretty special. And hey, apparently there's a prequel out there for $1. I might have to take a look sometime.